If you didn't receive one, please let me know. I'd like to begin by having us look at the pictures up there. How many of you can drive one of those? Yeah, yeah. How many of you can drive one of those? Well. Good question. Yeah, that's a good question. Absolutely. How many of you can drive one of those? Yeah, you have? Yeah, good. How many of you can drive one of those? Yeah.
I only had two. No, it wasn't 3. It was only a B.
Just it was only A, B, not a C, not a 3. Yeah. You know, I would never sit behind the wheel without taking some training. You need some training to do that kind of stuff, to drive that. I could probably drive that. I'd have to be very careful, those kinds of things. But to have the capability to do those, you really need special training. You need some special time in working together with it. How about this one? How many of you can drive one of those? Yeah? How about that? You wouldn't trust yourself on any one of those. How about that one? Yeah. How about captaining one of those? Yeah. It takes special skills, whether it's a truck or whether it's on the sea. It takes special skills to be able to handle those kinds of things. And so what I'm going to be talking about now is leadership. And I guess I already told you something about the reason for my quest to start looking at leadership is because when I was a circuit counselor in Louisiana, I hadn't thought too much about it. I felt my lack of leadership skills, I guess in some way in retrospect, as I was in Iowa, but didn't really need a whole bunch of them. Could have used them, certainly would have been more helpful. I probably would have made some better decisions when I was in Iowa if I had them, some better ones, some different ones. But when I was in Louisiana, and I was in a congregation where it was a house size, and I was struggling, and talked to Lyle Schaller, met with him a number of times on it. But then also, as I was getting into being a circuit counselor and the difficulties that churches and pastors were running into in that area of southwest Louisiana, the southern district, it really got me wondering and thinking and researching and starting to be on a quest for understanding leadership because I thought it was really important. And so my understanding is that shepherds actually do lead, except in North America. In North America, if the shepherds that I have seen in the foothills of Alberta, they herd sheep, and they have dogs. And they go around behind the sheep and they are herding them. The shepherds that I have seen in Africa, the shepherds walk ahead and the sheep follow. And the same I would guess in Palestine. Have you seen any? Yeah. I heard one story one time about a person saying that shepherds do lead, and then they were going along in the bus, a tourist bus, and they saw a shepherd chasing the sheep. And they said to the person, to the tour guide said, "We thought you said that shepherds lead." And they said, "Well, he's the butcher. He's taken them to market. They're not going to follow his voice. They're not going to lead." And so as I looked at things and studied them, this was in the Boy Scout hut that Matt went to in Lake Charles, the sign that was there. For the master, the Boy Scout leader, he said, "Which way did they go? How many of them were there? How fast were they going? I must find them because I am their leader." And they laughed about that, but certainly it's very applicable in numbers of ways. As I look at the Old Testament, among the people of God, God called the prophet, the priest, the king. Each of them had a very unique role. I appreciate the hymn that you picked for ordination, for installation. Anoint them prophets, anoint them priests, anoint them kings. The pastoral office that we are being called to is an office in which we are to be called to be a prophet, priest, and king. Not king in terms of ruling, but the Lord is my shepherd. He leads. The Old Testament kings were called shepherds. They were to lead the people in God's ways of righteousness. They weren't to be exercising the powers that many of them took and that many of them demanded. And so a prophet is a mouthpiece for God. The priest was a go-between, a bridge builder, going to God on behalf of the people and going from God to the people. And the shepherd leader was to be, the king was to be shepherd leader. As I take a look at those functions among the people of God in congregations today, I would translate them into proclaiming, that's preaching and teaching in general, care, counseling, caring, leading, to be a guide and a leader. It seems to me very often in the congregations that I was working with and that I see happening when I was circuit counselor is that the leader, the clergy leader, saw his ministry in terms of basically the proclaiming and caring. And that we as clergy had a lot of difficulty understanding what it meant to lead. And we would be looking to the lay people quite often to lead. And if lay people were looking to the pastor to lead, you know what happened. There was this void in that whole area, and not much leading was going on. There are numbers of biblical words, and we won't get into the whole biblical thing on these words, but there are numbers of words that we could look at. Oikonomia, a steward, a householder, one who manages and administrates, one who discharges and carries out their office, the one who provides direction and provision. 1 Corinthians 4, verse 2, it is required of a steward that he be found faithful. That's the word. Oikonomia, economics. The second one might be episkopos, translated bishop. Some translations have overseer. A bishop must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, and so forth. 1 Timothy 3, 1 and 2. Hedagonia, it talks about leading, it talks about God's leading. It's used basically in connection of God. God, you lead. God, you show the way. God, you instruct us. Hegiomai, it talks about leaders. Hegenominos, it's a leader or a guide, guiding in a way and guiding in a path. Acts 15:22. Proistomus, steko, to stand before. It's one who rules over, one who presides over the assembly, one who presides over a gathering of people. Kubernesis is an administration as in steering or administering a ship. It's to orchestrate, it's to direct an orchestra, as it were, to captain a ship. It deals with one who has the vision and sets the direction and the goal and course. It talks about one who can bring people together as a team on the ship, and one who has to make decisions and is decisive, therefore. And poimen, a shepherd, one who leads, one who provides, one who cares. The Lord is my shepherd. Matthew 9, verse 36, he looked out at them and he saw them as sheep without a shepherd. John 10, I am the good shepherd. 1 Peter 5, verse 4, the chief shepherd of our souls. In terms of, looks like I'm missing one. The next one there, the congregation's ministry functions. Oh, there we go. Let's take a look at that. The congregation's ministry, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm back here. Congregation ministry functions among the people. Quite often in congregations, I find that it's easy for me to have an imbalance of those three functions, that I can get so emphasizing the proclamation that I can neglect or care about caring takes second place and leading will take third place. Sometimes we look at them as equal in size, but they're not connected. They're all separate. The congregational ministry functions, I think, need to be integrated. The proclaiming, the care, and the leading need to be integrated together. And another way of looking at it among the people of God is to see the ministry functions there. Proclaiming is preaching, leading worship, teaching. The caring would be something about counseling, developing caring communities, caring relationships, visiting people, supporting people, and the leading would be visioning, missions, guiding, managing resources. As I break some of those down, for me, there are two categories that I tend to take a look at. And the one would be an area of manager. Some of the words on leading include managing. A manager is basically an individual who's evaluated by, did I achieve the goals of the organization within the proper consumption of resources? Our resources are such, have we managed them and used them to fulfill the goals that we have? A manager is someone basically who works with the contents of an envelope or box. A manager works within the boundaries. Managers, by and large, are people who value stability. They have difficulty with change, unpredictability, and chaos. The person who manages our office, she really hates it when I or one of the other pastors start talking about changing some things, because her goal is to make sure that everything is organized and everything is put together. The manager conserves and concentrates on doing things right so as to accomplish the goals. They work with and through others to accomplish the organization's objectives, and they have the authority over resources. On the other hand, a leader is someone who often stretches the envelope and enlarges the box. And so the office administrator has, this is the boundaries, and I come along and say, well, no, the boundaries are going to be this. And all of a sudden, it's chaos. The leader often works outside the parameters of the box. A leader is someone with a vision and a dream or an idea and can communicate to others so they will freely follow where they themselves wouldn't go. A leader quite often thrives in chaos, challenges and upsets the status quo. Therefore, a leader is going to be somebody who's quite often going to produce stress and tension within an organization. A leader often stretches and outpaces the available resources. When I came to Bethel in Edmonton, we were located on 98th Avenue. The ministry began, the council meetings began this way. There would be opening prayer. We would have the reading of the minutes from the last meeting. The treasurer would have the report, and then we would do ministry. Guess what happened to the ministry after the treasurer's report? After the treasurer's report, if it was a low month, which you're going to go through cycles of those kinds of things, after the treasurer's report, basically all discussion about ministry was shut down. Because we can't do that, because we can't afford it. Went through that for a series of several months, and I realized this ain't going to work. I said to the executive board, would you experiment with me for a while? Can we put the treasurer's report at the very end of the meeting? The president said, why would we do that? We've always done it that way before. And I said, help me to, would you stick with me for this a little bit? Try it, experiment with it, and I explained why I wanted to do it that way. It changed the whole tone of our meeting by talking about ministry very early on as opposed to the treasurer's report very early on. And so how you structure things is tremendously important. For me, the resources were guiding the whole thing. I think the ministry should be guiding and trusting that God is going to bring about the resources. And I really believe that if you put together a mission and ministry that is going to be held before the people will be responding to that, and they will then support that kind of a ministry. And so a leader quite often is going to have ministry that's going to seemingly outpace the resources that we have. A leader is somebody who identifies what season are we in. So that when I go to a mall, I don't go to malls very often, I'd hate to shop. But when I go to a mall, I want to find out where the store is that I'm going to be going to, and so therefore I go up to the directory, and at the directory they have a sign there that says, "You are here." And then I can get oriented. I think a leader in a congregation needs to be able to say to the congregation, this is where we are. This is the season we're in. We're in a season of consolidation, or we're in a season of plateauing, or we are in a season of growth, or we are in a season of nostalgia. What is the season that our congregation is in? And I think it's up to the leader to determine that and to be able to sense that. A leader is someone whose main thing is to ensure that the main thing remains the main thing. And I really believe that. There was one person who said that vision dies, that vision for most people is like a sieve. In 28 days, it's gone. And so the leader needs to keep on holding up before the people, why are we doing the things we do? Every month, you need to keep on saying to the people, this is what we're about. This is what God has called us to be. This is who we are. And so the leader needs to make sure that the main thing remains the main thing, because it can so easily be put on the back burner. It can be so easily forgotten, so that we think everybody knows what the main thing is, but we get so busily involved in other things that we forget what it is. And so the question for you then is, are you more of a tendency toward a manager or a leader? You know, the way I was raised and so forth, and on the farm, I was more of a manager. You know, to try to conserve, to be taking care of things, to work within the boundaries of what we had and so forth, and that was my tendency. And so in some ways it still is. But I've had to teach myself that I need to also be a leader. And where are you at? Are you more of a natural leader, or are you more of a natural manager? If you're more of a manager, what do you need to do? What kinds of classes do you need to have? What do you need to study so you can become more of that? If you're more of a leader, do you need to have some classes so you help to understand what a role of a manager is? So that you, as pastor, you also need to do some managing. You're not just a leader. You need to be able to do both and. So where are you at? What's the seminary doing to help you in the midst of that? I'd like to move on to the next one, the 5 levels of leadership. 5 levels of leadership: position, permission, production, people development, and personhood. Level number 1 is on position. This is based upon rights. People follow you because they have to. In this one here, your influence is basically your call documents and your title as reverend. People will follow you because you've been called there, because you're the pastor there. Your security is going to be based upon that. Your level of influence is based upon the call document, your appointment there, your placement there. But generally, people will not follow you beyond that stated authority. It will last for a little while. They will follow you for a little while. But if your whole influence, if you expect, is going to be based upon the fact that I'm called to that place, your chances are that people who are very well educated aren't always going to be impressed with that. That people who are white-collar workers are not just simply going to look at you and say, oh, he's the pastor. There was a day in which the fact that you were the pastor meant that you were probably one of the best educated people in town, and people would look to you for authority. They would come to you for a variety of different things, but that day, basically, in our part of the world, has changed. And also, I believe that younger people do not look at clergy the same way they did at one time. And so the younger generation, I'm teaching a class over at Concordia University College, and it's on parish administration and team ministry. Most of the people in there, half of the people are DPS. One person is a parish nurse. 2 are pre-sem for here. 1 is pre-sem in the Catholic Church. And when I went in there and introduced myself, I did the same as I do at Bethel. I said, you can call me Marv. Because I really believe that the respect that I get is not based upon my call. I think that most people, if you develop a relationship with them, if I insist that my respect is based upon the call that I have, it will only go so far, and that's it. I do not believe that churches should have reserved parking lots for clergy. It communicates stuff that I don't think are healthy. If you want a reserved spot, if you want to make sure that you have one, make sure it's way in the far corner where nobody else is going to be using it, and then make sure that you park there and you walk the rest of the way. If there are going to be reserved signs at churches, I think they should be for visitors and for people who have handicaps. And went around and around with that on some people at Bethel, on Bethel staff who expected there were going to be reserved signs for them. And I said, absolutely not. I don't think it's healthy. It doesn't communicate good stuff to the public. You had a question, Steve. Oh, I thought you were raising your hand. Yeah. Okay. And so under this one here, your influence generally is not going to extend beyond the lines of your job description. The longer you stay in this position without moving to number 2, the less influence you're going to have. But however, in a small cat-sized congregation, they don't probably want much more than that. And on this, we need to remember that I had 10 years of ministry experience in St. John, Lake Charles. When I came to Bethel, how many years of ministry experience did I have with them? None. I began all over down at level number 1 because I didn't have relationships, and the other ones certainly weren't there. And so that's number 1 is the position. Level number 2 relates to permission, and that deals with relationships. It's easy to develop relationships with some size congregations. And like the cat-sized congregation, I never really got too close with too many of those people. You try, but you wouldn't. The Collie congregation, Becky and I were getting invited to their places to have meals with them and join their family functions over and over and over, hardly ever at the other one, even though there were family gatherings. And so in this one, your people are going to follow you because of the connections that you make with them, establishing meaningful relationships, and your leadership is going to be able to flourish in those kinds of people there. People in this level don't care how much you know, but they want to know that you care about them. You can have lasting relationships. Without lasting relationships, you won't be able to sustain a long and effective ministry. You can love people without leading them, but you can't lead people without loving them. Relationships are the glue. And I mentioned to you in the collie-sized congregation how I established relationships. And fortunately, that wasn't my plan. I wasn't thinking about it. I didn't say, this is my plan. I'm going to establish relationships with people by going out and picking rocks with them, by doing hay. It's just how God happened to lead me into that kind of thing. I accidentally went into it. In this one here, pastors who move every 2-3 years, you're never going to establish good relationships, not lasting relationships. At one time, when I was doing my doctoral stuff, I did a study of my home district, Manitoba, Saskatchewan. And I found out that the average pastor stayed at a congregation there 18 months. And I thought, what can you do in 18 months? And how much of a relationship can you establish so that people are going to follow? And so this is a crucial one. You don't want to skip this one by jumping to number 3. If you try to jump to number 3 without developing relationships, if you say, I'm the called pastor here and I'm going to jump that relationship and I'm going to go straight to production and do results at this place, you're going to miss something very vital. And so number 3 deals with production. People follow you here because of what you've done for the congregation. That as you do things to build up the congregation in its image of itself, doesn't have to be building it up in terms of numbers, but helping it to understand who it is and growing it in terms of its identity. In the artesian, the collie-sized congregation, in 1974, there was a tremendous drought. 1975, I got there in 74. In 1975, there was a tremendous drought in southwest Minnesota and Dakotas, South Dakota specifically. The farmers in our area had an abundance of hay. God had blessed their hay crops. It was just huge amount of hay. And so we were sitting around one day at a church council meeting, and they were talking about that. And I simply asked the question, what would you think if we gathered some hay from here and shipped it to Iowa or to Minnesota and South Dakota? And they said, can we do that? I said, sure, we can do that. They said, but we don't have a large congregation. I said, I bet if you put word out to your neighbors, they would also bring hay. What happened was, this small congregation, this collie congregation, and I still have pictures of this huge hay pile, small hay bales in those days, and they stacked up one hay pile after another, and the trucks from our community and other Lutheran churches were bringing hay in, and they were selling it to people in South Dakota for 50 cents a bale. South Dakota was willing to pay $10 a bale if they could get hay for their cattle. And the trucks, the semi-trucks from South Dakota were rolling in, and from southwest Minnesota. They were rolling in, picking up hay. The cameras from the TV from Waterloo and from Waverly were there, the newspaper paper people, and they were taking pictures. And this congregation, when I go back there, they say, remember when we had all that hay out here and the trucks were rolling in? The congregation, I had a call there, but I established relationships. Not that I planned it that way. And then we were able to do something wonderful in terms of building up the image of this congregation, that they believed they could do things, that they could make a difference. And I had, doing that kind of stuff, I had the ticket. I had passport within that community, within that congregation. Not, you can misuse it, but you need to be careful. And it's that place where leadership is not just being talked about, it's action, it's walking the walk, it's people getting involved in the mission and the purpose of the church, it's people who become active in it, and it builds strong congregations. The fourth one is people development. The third one is, what are you doing for the congregation? The fourth one is, what are you doing for the people? Are you equipping the people? Are you building them up? Great leadership, I believe, comes in the development of the followers, of empowering people. A worker's main responsibility is not doing the work ourselves, but equipping the saints for the work of the ministry. The leader's main responsibility is developing others to do the work, so that, as it were, I try to work myself out of a job. And so, that never happens. But at level 1, people follow the leader because you have the title or the position. At level 2, people follow because they love the leader. At level 3, they follow because they admire the leader. And at level 4, they follow because they are loyal to the leader, because the leader has done something for them personally to connect with them and to help them to be the people that God has created them to be. And they begin to see, I can do that. And so we'd have classes on grief ministry. And I would take the first class. And we had people coming through the grief ministry class. And so after that class, I'd say to 1 or 2 people, I'd like you to lead the next class. And they'd say, well, I don't know if I can do that. I said, sure you can do it. You just went through it. You know more about grief than I do because you were part of it. I was just the leader there, but you identified with the people and you can do it. And so people can do those kinds of ministries, and we can help to teach people so that they can do it. And so part of our ministry at Bethel is trying to grow people so that when Michael Gillingham takes a group up to L'Orange of junior high youth, the junior high youth go up there and they run the Vacation Bible School. They run the Vacation Bible School in L'Orange, and then they go out to Reservation, Big Stone Reservation or another one, and they run a Vacation Bible School there. And so when he takes the senior high youth to El Paso and to Juarez, it's they who are doing the ministry. And he helped to try to grow people so that they can feel like they are involved in it. And so you teach and you model. And this past summer, we were working downtown in at the Rock at the old St. Peter's area. We had grade 7s down there, and they were involved in leading Bible studies. They were involved in teaching the classes down there. It's part of, I think, who we are as people, to help people grow in being the people that God has created them to be, so that, they can feel like somebody has invested something in them. And so there are numbers of different ministries that people can be involved in. I take a group to Kenya usually every 2 years, and when we go there, they are the ones who get ready to be involved in the ministry, but the other part of it is they get ready to work side by side with people in another culture and to see how they can grow through that. And the 5th level is personhood. This one is based upon respect. People follow you because of who you are and what you represent. The people on this one will be very few. Be a person like Billy Graham, Mother Teresa. One that I think about in our Lutheran circles, for some of you will remember the name, Oswald Hoffman. Oswald Hoffman, Ozzy is promoting this. Ozzy is doing it. Ozzy is there. And people will just follow because of who he was, what he represented. And these people are bigger than life. There are very few of us who will ever make it there. But it's a step that's reserved for those leaders who spent years growing people and organizations, and the organization is identified with them. You talk about Lutheran Hour Ministries, that's Ozzy Hoffman. And for me it still is, because he was larger than life itself. Any thoughts or any comments on that before we go on to some leadership styles?
I was thinking that talking about this in terms of going into a congregation, but then and starting at 1 and moving up the levels. But even if someone else comes into the congregation, I guess we need to be mindful that for that person, you're starting at 1 as well too. So you may be at level 4 with your congregation, but if somebody new comes in, they have no idea who you are. You're at level 1 with that person. So it'd be easy to get into the trap of, you owe me this much respect because everybody else gives me this much respect because I've established those relationships, but that person has no basis for that.
Absolutely. The example I think about, and see if connects with you, is we issued a call to James Avery, and he came in, and he's been there now, I guess, 4 years this February. I've been there 26 years this year, and so we were talking, and I said, James, there'll be some people at this place that will never look to you as pastor, their pastor. But as you are here, and as you develop relationships, there will be some people who will never look at me as their pastor, because they're going to connect with you in ways that they will not connect with me. And so over a period of time, and as we were calling him, as we called Michael with youth ministry, as we called Delois with children's ministry, and Matt and so forth, I said to every one of them, to the council, I said, it's going to take at least 3 years, before this person really will become really effective in ministry, because the relationships need to develop. They will come in as pastor, yes, or as director of parish services, yes, but they will need to also, with people, move up those levels. Good point. Thank you. Yeah.
Looking at these steps like this, it seems to me that it's kind of a cumulative thing.
Mm-hmm.
That, as you increase the basis for
Yeah.
leadership and so forth, it's not that the previous ones disappear,
Mm-hmm.
but they're just added to by these further
Yeah.
levels. And
Yeah.
so, I wonder, I guess, when you were talking about the first one, the positional one, it seems to me that doesn't stop for you.
No.
No. That even people calling you pastor
Absolutely.
and so forth,
Yeah.
that's not inappropriate. The fact that you've come to those, further levels, doesn't move that out.
No.
Or at least it should for some people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are numbers of people in the age level that I'm in and others who will always call me Pastor Marv. And because they come from the generation where loyalty, where that was respected within the community, and they would rather die than not call me Pastor Marv. But even so, even with those who don't call me Pastor Marv, the position still carries. And you're right, it goes on, but I don't have to depend upon it for my influence. It's part of the total package, but my influence gets greater beyond that in other ways. Yeah. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Do you
Sure.
find that it goes the other way too, where maybe someone doesn't have a relationship with you, or they don't care much that you're a pastor, but they see you as someone who, say, gets things done, and so they'll follow your leadership at the level of production, because they recognize that you're a good leader in that way, but you don't have that foundation of, like, you're a pastor, maybe they don't care about that, or you don't have a personal relationship with them. Like, do you find that that would be a shaky foundation for leadership, or would it be better to build from number one, then build up to number two, if you find someone entering in kind of at level 3 or 4 or something?
There are people who study leadership who say that leadership can be defined in one word, and that one word is influence. If my influence with people, and it probably will be with some, is only because I got some things done, I don't think it's going to be as well developed, or it's going to be as healthy an influence as if I also have a relationship with them. But the matter of fact is that there are going to be some people who I officiated at their wedding or their funeral. I got something done for them as people. I will have some influence. Hopefully, Lord willing, along the way, I'll be able to grow the other parts so that they can also become more integrated into the life of the church. Yeah.
Kind of speak to that maybe just a little bit and tweak something in my mind. If you do have somebody, and you possibly could, I mean, if you see that particular person as a well-organized, wonderful man that gets things done, so you come in and you join, the instant that something goes wrong because you haven't built those other things, they will turn around and be as quick to possibly leave that situation. and not give you the benefit of the doubt because you don't have those relationships and stuff built. So
Yeah.
I think that, yeah.
It's a good point. Might happen. Could happen, yes.
Good.
Yeah, sure, could happen. Thank you. Talking about leadership styles. Style has to do with how one leads, the stance one takes. It refers to one's distinctive approach to others and to ministry. It's the characteristic manner of expressing your values and executing the work, the ministry that you're involved in. And one person that I look to and I appreciate his description of the 4 styles is a fellow named Dale. His last name is Dale, and I can't remember his first name. But the reason I appreciate the styles, and no one is part of a pure style by any means. And so, I'm just talking in generalities. I don't know that anybody's a pure commander or catalyst or hermit or encourager. But he talks about these and it gives me a picture. The reason I like Scholler's description, there are lots of people who categorize churches according to size. Some have different ways of talking about it. But I like Scholler's because I like the picture of cat and collie and garden. Those are things that I can associate with. And I can associate these kinds of styles. And so he talks about 4 styles. And congregation leadership model, the top part is emphasizing the congregational mission. It goes on the left side from positive to the right side negative. And you have the whole spectrum in there. And then it talks about emphasizing members' needs, and it's talking about members' needs in terms of the morale of the people. The morale of the people can be, you can as a pastor be encouraging and be very active in ministering to the needs, or you can be more passive. And so he talks about the 4 different styles there that he uses. And rarely, as I said, will anyone use these in a pure form. I'll talk about them in that pure form because just easier to do so. There are backup ones, there are harmonizing things, there are blended forms, a whole variety of things that can be used. We can extend our leadership styles, but I will just talk about them in the pure form. I'll start with the hermit. What do you get as a description for a hermit leadership? What would you think of?
By himself. Where are they?
By himself. Where are they? Yeah. He hides in his office. Yeah, sure does. And so a hermit is described as passive in regarding members' needs and negative regarding the mission, the goals of the mission of the church. This person quite often will be somebody who's uncomfortable with people and with goals. The seminary had somebody who came to attend the seminary here numbers of years ago when we were still on 98th Avenue, and he came from Nebraska, and he was in the classes here, and he was in leading worship. He was in liturgics class. And Dr. Ron Voll was a member of our congregation, and he's was one of the faculty members here. And this fella, when he would lead worship services, he would stand to the side. He wouldn't stand in the middle. And he'd just sort of stand on the side, and he'd sort of cringe there. And he just could absolutely not stand in front of people. He couldn't, when he was to turn and face the people, he couldn't do that. And so, we tried to work with him, we tried to help him, and finally the faculty had to say to him, "We don't think you're cut out for the ministry." And you were here at that time. I don't know if you remember the situation, but I remember the field worker, and it was just so painful for him. And the whole congregation ached for him because he simply couldn't do it. Hermit-style people can be very introverted, but a hermit-style person can be somebody who's been really hurt, maybe sometimes hurt by a congregation, sometimes maybe been torn up and chewed up and abused, and therefore at the next one they're at, they just withdraw because they've been hurt so badly. They postpone things, they hide, they're uncertain, They can be pastors who follow the followers. They yield congregations that are ineffective and inert. It can be a good style that we withdraw to at times. As I said, I'm typically an introvert. And so when I'm with people, a lot of the time, it wears me out. And I've come to realize over the years that I therefore need to withdraw for a period of time. And so sometimes I intentionally schedule a time away by myself, go out to Lake Isle to one of the members who has said I can use their place, to go to various places. I'd take one of our members' motorhomes and I'd go to Elk Island, be there by myself for several days. I would take books along and so forth, but it would just be a time to withdraw, almost like a hermit. But to have that as your style of ministry is very difficult. It's a good style if you want to buy time for a decision. You don't want to make a decision. You said, I certainly don't want to press for that. Or it can be a good style if you need time out for rest and recuperation. But to have that as your main style of ministry can lead to difficulties. Some people call it an eroding style. It erodes the mission of the congregation. It erodes the members' morale because the pastor is not there, not leading. The second one that I will go to is the commander. What do you get as a picture of this one?
Authoritative.
Authoritative. You will do it because I'm the general, because I said so. Yeah, it's the military kind of thing where you have to have it in certain situations. And in the commander, the congregational mission, it's negative, but it's active regarding people. It gets people involved. It gets people going. But they're not going to go very long if you keep on saying, do it, do it, do it. Commander communicates clearly and cleanly, expects others to follow immediately and with no questions asked. It's effective if there's an emergency. The place is on fire. Everybody get out of here. But how long can you keep on commanding people? For certain situations, it's important, and you can adopt it for some times, but eventually it's going to be a negative. It's an efficient style, but it's not an effective, but it's not going to last very long. The leader with this style demands clearly defined and quick, simple answers to each problem, and for the commander, the answers are usually black and white. Very clear. It's this or it's that. You're in or you're out. There's a very narrow agenda, and the agenda is determined by the commander. The mindset is very often rigid, and followers have little latitude for exercising ministry. It's a short-range style, emergency situations, which usually are very few. It can create pressure in an organization. It can create conflict in an organization. The commander style is very low on relationships. And so you're not going to build relationships with that style. The next one that we'll take a quick look at is the encourager. An encourager style is a person who has an empathetic style. They are positive regarding members' needs, but they're passive regarding, they're positive regarding the mission, but they're passive regarding members' needs. Personal relationships here are more important than organizational goals. The morale is chief over the mission. It's more of a therapist style. You hold hands, you stroke people, you pat people on the head, you encourage, you're a cheerleader. It's almost, I'm okay, you're okay, let's keep on going. The relational needs are a top priority, and there often is little energy left for congregational goals. It's very person-centered. which can be positive. A person who's an encourager needs to have the gift of listening well, being available, nurturing, soothing. It's a good style to adopt if there's a conflict within the congregation, within the organization, to be an encourager, to be able to be a mediator, to try to settle differences. So if there's stress and conflict, it's a good kind of thing. But if you want to get the congregation to move and to grow, it's probably not going to happen, because this person's style is to basically hold the hands of other people. And then the catalyst. The catalyst is sometimes called the most effective style. A catalyst is an agent that causes or spreads a change, that brings about change. It causes a reaction. A catalyst is seemingly more balanced in mission and members' needs. According to Dale, it creates an organizational atmosphere for positive goals and builds people up. It retains stability. The catalyst has a wide array of the leader's skills, initiates relationships, focuses on the goals, a flexible leader. Some people would say that one of the biblical examples of a catalyst would be Nehemiah, when they were rebuilding the walls. A biblical example of the commander would be some of the judges. Take charge. There's a job that needs to be done. A hermit, some would say, was Saul at the end of his career. He was fearful of everybody, couldn't trust anybody. An encourager, Barnabas. So there are some biblical examples. I don't think anybody's a pure one on any one of them. And so catalysts can be effective leaders. You can extend your basic style so that a catalyst can extend their style so that sometimes they are into the encourager, sometimes a hermit, sometimes a commander. If you're an encourager, you can extend yourself into the catalyst stuff. At times you can cross over very little bit, maybe into the commander, and you can also become a hermit. If you are a hermit, you can sometimes become a little bit of an encourager or catalyst or a commander, and a commander can also extend their style into the other areas also. You can have blending styles, and so there are no pure styles, and each one of us, we take a look at them, and there are backup styles that we can have for our ministry with people. And so, what does this mean regarding leadership? What's the picture of leadership at the seminary? Is there an integrated approach to the prophet, priest, and king within the seminary curricula? How are we doing with leadership in Lutheran Church Canada, in LCC congregations? In Plato's Republic, it's a statement, what is honored will be cultivated. Do we honor leadership? Are we cultivating leaders? And so, what kinds of questions do you have at this point? Comments?
Has anybody done any work using the Myers-Briggs with regard to leadership? In this,
Yeah.
It seems to me that there's some echoes here,
Yeah.
or maybe a kind of takeoff from it or something.
Yeah. We had a team back when the district conventions, I guess it was the district convention, it was in Vancouver. How many years ago was that? It's probably about 6 years ago. and we brought Steve Wagner in to lead a seminar before the district convention on team ministry. And we encouraged congregations to bring their ministry teams there and to go through that. And he had us go through that and then have the teams sit down together at the table and talk about what are our different personality mixes. And it was interesting for us to do that at Bethel. Yeah. Some overlaps, some connections. Good. Other thoughts or questions? I have a brother-in-law who served in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. His last 17 years were up in Fairbanks, Alaska, and he retired to live down in Virginia, where he has a number of his children living. And so Phil is down there, and he's working with some churches there, just doing some part-time stuff in his retirement. And he came across a fellow who's a layperson who was a CEO of a corporation, and the district president had asked him, this CEO guy, this layperson, to go around and visit congregations because they were having difficulties there in their district. And so this guy from the corporation went around and visited congregations and sat and talked with clergy and made notes and all that kind of stuff. And he came back to the district president, and the district president said, so what are you finding about our clergy and our congregations? And his comment was basically this: there is a crisis of leadership in our congregations. And Lutheran Church Missouri Synod has set up the Pastoral Leadership Institute, and Steve Wagner and numbers of people in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod have been putting that on, and I don't know how long it's been going on. I know we've had a significant number of clergy from this district who have gone there and who have spoken very highly of it. Matt currently is involved in it, James is involved in it, and they are getting perspectives on leadership which are very important as far as understanding what leadership is. Any thoughts, comments? Yeah,
Just a question.
Jonathan.
Have you ever put together the styles of leadership and the congregational sizes and asked, does a certain style of leadership tend to gravitate, pastors with a certain style of leadership, do they tend to gravitate towards a certain size of congregation? Or is that something you shouldn't really put together?
I would hope that, and I'm not sure if this will answer your question, I would hope that when a pastor gets a call, he has the wherewithal to sit down and say, what's my leadership style? And then to look at the congregation that's calling him and to say, the congregation here, in light of what I know about it and light of what I've found out about it, if I'm really going to be, quote, effective there in terms of leading that congregation, they're going to need a leadership style that is different than what I'm currently serving in. And then you need to make the intentional decision. Do I want to move to that place and change my leadership style? I don't see that happening very often by clergy. What I do see is we think that the style that I've been operating with in this congregation is also going to fit in this one, and I have seen clergy go there and they grow this congregation that was at whatever size there, they grow it down to match the style that they're at. I don't know that we spend enough time thinking about it to realize, will I be able to shift gears? What's it going to take for me to shift gears? Because we can shift gears. They're saying you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You can. It's just that old dogs don't like to learn new tricks. Am I willing to make the sacrifice that's necessary to change? Because I think we do a disservice to congregations by saying, you will meet me where I'm at in my leadership style, as opposed to saying, I'm going to adopt the leadership style that's needed for this congregation and be willing to make the changes and shift gears. That I'm going to say, In order for me to really be effective at that one, I'm going to have to learn how to drive a dump truck. Never have driven one. I've never driven a speedboat, but I better learn how to, because that's what that place needs. And so I don't know if that answers it.
Yeah. And I guess the tricky thing is realizing that I'm going to have to shift gears, but also realistically evaluate, do I have the capacity
Yeah.
to shift gears?
Yeah, absolutely. And some people feel much more comfortable and want to stay at a collie because it's an encourager style place. And that's very effective there. And there's nothing wrong with it. But to expect that it's going to be the same at another place does an injustice to that other place. Yeah. Other comments or thoughts or questions? Yes.
It just seems like when we talk about this, we talk a lot about how we have to look at our style, we have to be ready to change our leadership style. But what about the fact that if it's a divine call, what about God's work in us? What about the Holy Spirit working in us? I haven't heard that over the last half an hour or so.
I guess sometimes the Spirit would like to work in us and use us to be able to do those kinds of things. I think sometimes we stifle the Spirit. I think that certainly with God all things are possible, that I can change. The question is, am I going to place myself into His hands and saying, Lord, use me in whatever way is needed at that place? Or will I go there and say, this is who I am, now the rest of you people like it? That's being blunt, but that's, yeah.
Thinking about the cat and all kinds of depictions for congregations, and, I guess I've heard that, that a collie, for example, will love their pastor if he has this style, or if he has this style. You know, in other words, it would be much more forgiving, let's say, of style, or maybe time, patient or something like that. And
They're very accepting.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So, yeah, I mean, that picture of the kinds of congregations almost seems to also suggest where style will work, or how rigid people will be in terms of accepting certain styles but not others, or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
The thing is, when I'm called to a place, I believe that I'm called to mission. And if I'm called to a place to do mission, and I say, well, this is what the congregation is, and that's what we're going to keep it to be. I got to Bethel in Edmonton, and the night of my installation, and you were there, Norm, and you were there, Ed. The night of my installation in Bethel, May 10th, 1987, there were over 200 people there. The place was packed. The balcony was packed. The back all the way through was packed. And we went home, and I said to Becky, wow, this could be a really exciting place. Could be a really exciting place. My first sermon there I preached, there were 68 people. And I thought, God, what did I get myself into? And I met with the council, and we talked, and Ed knows those days well. And I had a couple conversations with him, wondering, what did they think about their clergy? How did they look at them in the past and stuff like that? Were they anti-clerical? But we had some elders meetings that went after midnight. And finally, at one of the elders meetings, I sat down and I closed the book because we always did the same thing. We rehashed the war stories of the 1970s. And this was 1987. And I closed the book and I said, okay, gentlemen, nobody leaves this room until we finish the stories. We will sit here and I'll out-war story every one of you. Because I was there in the 1970s. And I said, I don't want to hear the stories after tonight. Because we've got a mission that God has entrusted to us. And so we went through. And after that meeting, the chairman of the elders resigned, and things changed. We were going through things, and in January of that year, we had a new president. And I sat down with him, with Bert Proskew, who worked downtown for the provincial government. And I brought some statistics to him, and I talked with him, and I said, Bert, take a look at these statistics. And he looked at him, and he says, is that us? I said, that's us. He said, my God, he said, if we don't do something, we'll close our doors in 1999. Took him to the council meeting, I says, what do you folks want to do? You know, we got choices to make, but we can just be happy with being a collie, and I can tell some stories about that one too, because they thought they were a very loving congregation. And I said, well, I'd like you I'd like the four of you on the board of elders, one to stand at this corner of the entryway, one at that corner, one at that corner, and one at this corner. And so they did. I said, I want you to do it for 4 Sundays. Don't talk to anybody. Just watch and see what the interaction is. And so there were people who were longtime members there, and Ed's brother was one of them. And Alf would walk out of the church, out of the sanctuary doors, and he'd stand along the side. And if nobody came to see him, because he wasn't really integrated into the life of that congregation in many ways, Alf would walk out the back door. And they came to the meeting and they said, we see what you say. We're friendly to ourselves and to people who are integrated and people who are like us. And so I said, well, what are we going to do? We can make some changes. We've got options. And so we started making some changes. And so the congregation grew to a garden and to a house. And as soon as we started hitting the house and we started talking about some other things, about building or relocating because we didn't have parking and those kinds of things, some of the people in the congregation says, why are we doing that? We're big enough for us now. Because they could pay the bills and they could see that the doors would stay open. And I said, is that what we're about? Keeping the doors open, paying the bills. And so, you know, it's you ask the questions and people have to struggle with them. I don't have all the answers, and they can work on them, and I know God's Spirit then works on the hearts and lives of people. And one of the people who was tremendously against our relocating, one of the founding members, he still is part of Bethel, Roy was tremendously against it. And he did many things to try to not let it happen. And I sat down with him for coffee one time and I said, Roy, where are your daughters worshiping? He said, they aren't. I said, where are your grandchildren worshiping? He said, they aren't. I said, do you want to spend time in eternity with them? Yeah. He had some tears. I said, what are we going to do about it? And he changed reluctantly. And Roy now says that's the best thing we ever did. But you have to trust God's Spirit to work on people. And it's tough stuff. But I do not believe that God calls a congregation to be the size that they're at necessarily. Some of them will be because they just don't have opportunity to reach out. There are reasons why congregations can stay the same size. And I don't believe that numbers are the end of themselves, but the harvest is white. It is white. And just this morning, I had an email from one of our members who is worshiping with us. He's a Lutheran clergyman, not from our synod, from the other synod. He's been worshiping with us for quite some time. And he sent me an email in which he quoted and showed an article in which the article was saying that mainline denominations and Christian churches in general are becoming insignificant and irrelevant to our culture. The question is, are we just going to take that? Are we just going to lie down and say, "Uncle"? Or are we going to say, "God, give us the wisdom and the insight to be able to do something about who we are"? We are the people of God. You have called us to this community. Guide us, give us insight and wisdom and heart, passion, to be the people of God in this community, whatever that means. And so, question for here about leadership, I believe the question is, what is honored and what's being cultivated? Lunchtime. Thank you.
Did you have the clerk for the meeting? Sure. Chairman of the